So SPELL then, a framework for understanding and responding autism. And so many of the approaches that we were seeing were all about fixing autism, making autistic people not autistic anymore. Well, SPELL isn't like that. It very much recognizes that autistic people are autistic and respects that, and tries to help people to help us to help people to manage that. To make autism more accessible through getting to know autistic people, developing a shared understanding and empathy. I mentioned the social validity aspect, but we also need to be ethical and inclusive and not to other people. And so many descriptions of autism are othering, you know, that is to see people as different in a negative way and disregard them. And so the approach very much has been designed in partnership, and this is particularly so in recent years together with autistic people. We found that the framework is applicable across a number of different societies and cultures. And I've done work in Singapore, in Malta, in Australia. And I know that other colleagues have worked in different parts of Europe with the framework, and it seems to be effective. It's practical, easily understood and applied. SPELL, if you think SPELL and you run through the spell in your mind, it's often a shorthand way of cutting through to what some of the issues might be. Also to design, to provide a context for other inclusive responses, for example, universal design, and increasingly we're seeing universal design coming into the picture. People talk about autism friendliness. I'm not so keen on that term. I think that accessible universal design is a much better term, because this makes things accessible to everyone, not just especially for autistic people. And the approach is supported by evidence. I also mentioned TEACH earlier, and the approach very much is compatible with some of the other approaches that we've seen, for example, TEACH and PECS to a lesser degree. We don't quite see PECS so often these days, but all of these things are part of the general way of working with autism. So the framework can be helpful, as I was saying, in identifying some of the underlying issues related to difficulties, but also to provide opportunities for people. I mentioned the prospect supported employment service that we ran in London, which was set up with Professor Patricia Howlin, Catherine Birkin and myself back in the early 90s, when we were looking very much at what are the barriers that stop people getting into work. And SPELL was incredibly helpful to us, you know, to make sure that people had enough structure, that we were seeing the world from their point of view, that the arousal levels were kept in check, and so on and so forth. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. We also need to understand how some of the characteristics of autism, and I emphasize some of the characteristics of autism, can be a barrier to learning and opportunity and to quality of life. And often this is because of what we don't do rather than the condition itself. So it's our job, see very much as our job, to help the person remove or to reduce these barriers where they do exist. So just to briefly go through the 5 components of the framework. It's around structure, positive approaches and expectations, empathy, that is seeing the world from the other person's point of view. And we often accuse autistic people of lacking empathy, where it's very clear that some of the services that they get autism has not been considered at all. Low arousal, Maureen has mentioned low arousal approaches. You'll probably be familiar with those. And links, and by links it means working closely with families or agencies working closely together to provide a level of consistency.